This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.
The young shining cuckoo is fed by its foster parents on insects and spiders. But the korimako, or bellbird, has a much more interesting diet of nectar. It's been something of a radio personality and has sung on shortwave radio to Australia and the Pacific nations for 30 years. However, the early recordings failed to reflect the versatility of the bellbird, with its wide variety of liquid notes and artistically placed clicks and bell-like sounds. It's not surprising that Maori mythology describes korimako, the bellbird, as the messenger of Tane, sent to herald the coming of the sun.
Community or chaos? We can construct and nurture community or fall into chaos. Over the next hour, Marvin Hubbard hosts conversations toward creating a fairer, more equal society.
Community or Chaos is made possible with the support of Quakers Aotearoa. You'll find them online at quaker.nz.
Good morning, friends. Welcome to Community or Chaos. We're very fortunate to have Robbie Moginie with us today. She's the Chief Executive of Presbyterian Support Otago, and they do a lot of good work. And you can podcast this by going to oar.org.nz and then going to podcast and going to Community or Chaos. Well, welcome to Community or Chaos, hopefully more community.
Oh, kia ora, and thank you so much for having me, Marvin.
Well, thanks for coming. What led or motivated you to commit to social service with Presbyterian Support?
Well, I actually found myself here a little bit by chance. I was invited into a temporary role supporting PSO during a period of change. So there was a vacancy in leadership, and that was in our Enliven services. But sort of when I look back now, in retrospect, it was an obvious next step for me. In terms of my career development, I've enjoyed many different roles in organisations, but nearly all of my career has been in service environments. I tended to sort of move on to the next role whenever I could see an opportunity to be useful to good people trying to make a positive difference in their communities. So my first management role was working in a brewery, but even there, the thing that I got most excited about was supporting really amazing long-tenured engineers and production workers as they faced redundancy and transition to either a new job or early retirement. And some had been there for over 30 years. So I think helping people to see themselves in their best light, understanding themselves as others who truly appreciate them, see them, and also to really bring to light their potential, how their really unique gifts can be applied in new ways is kind of magic. So I moved into the health sector pretty early in my career. My husband's a rural GP, and
so he's in service too.
Yeah, and in fact, his father before him. So yeah, I was really intrigued. I hadn't worked in health when I met him, but he talked about his experiences as a young doc working in the hospital setting, and it just made me think about how challenging that was, and I wanted to help. So yeah, I ended up in health, thinking about initially how frontline health workers can be much more supported and valued. So that was sort of working in HR, and moved into leadership from there.
That's still something we need to work on, I suspect.
I think you're right, yes. Yeah. Sorry,
yes,
you go.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, in terms of PSO specifically, because obviously it's more than just health. Once I got in here, it really did have all of the sort of cool things that I love about great work. So a really wonderful set of capable volunteers and staff, and they've all got this really strong passion and drive to serve their community. And we also obviously have a base of clients and residents with a genuine need. So whilst I did arrive here just trying to provide something temporary, I just met this amazing group of people, including actually our volunteer board members. And so, I get to be part of this wonderful organisation for Otago, and it's definitely probably the best role I've ever had.
How do you see Presbyterian support, and can you talk about briefly about its history and also its purpose?
Sure, yeah. So I will try and be brief. It's quite a long history.
You don't have to be too brief.
Look, Presbyterian Support Otago has actually been serving in this region for 120 years. So we were the very first of now 7 independent Presbyterian support organisations that operate across Aotearoa. And, of course, our roots go back to the Presbyterian Church. And it really started where local parishes were just responding to the people in need long before there was any or much government support available. So,
yeah, I remember I actually don't remember it, but I know about the sermon on cheapness and low pay, paying your seamstress actually being paid very poorly.
Yeah, and
the idea of a cheap economy and cheap wages is not new, unfortunately.
It's not, and I love that our forefathers, the Presbyterians, sort of started to talk about that very early on. So we have a mission, and it was early on, to focusing on practical support for people who can be overlooked, like those seamstresses that you talk about. Actually, one of my favourite stories from those early days is about 2 remarkable women, Mary McQueen and Evelyn McAdam. And they were, while the church elders, which to be honest were mostly men, they were still arguing about whether an orphanage should be established or if this was not the church's responsibility. And these amazing pioneering women just got on with caring for orphaned and destitute children who were living near the church. So they opened up their own rooms and they housed those children. And a year after that, our first children's home was established, with those 2 women becoming its first matrons. So, yeah, I kind of love that story that captures something that's still part of who we are today. The way we respond to our community has changed dramatically over the last 100 years as society changes, but the reason hasn't. We've always tried to figure out where people are falling through the gaps and respond with compassion and practical support. And,
I remember, and it may still happen, you still do surveys of people's needs? Because that's been very important. I remember the one on inadequate housing. Not only that there weren't enough housing, but housing was cold and...
Absolutely, yeah. We have in the past done some pretty impactful research, practical research like that. But I have to admit we haven't conducted similar surveys recently, and certainly not in my time. Which it's not to say that we won't, but probably we're really focusing on working more in partnership now. So for future research, we're obviously not a dedicated research organisation. But we do see that we've got a fundamental part to play in providing the stories of lived experience here in Otago. So, we're part of the Presbyterian Support Federation. So that's the sort of group of all of those 7 organisations. And they led a survey last October, for example, which explored New Zealand attitudes around elders. It highlighted perceptions that our older people are undervalued in New Zealand, and that there's a wide sense that we need more investment and supports for older people. And sort of we're part of other organisations, so the Aged Care Association, and they regularly produce publications on the need for aged care reform, and obviously the Federation contributes to that as well.
Can you talk about the strategic plan for 2026 to 2030?
Sure. Not many people ask you to do that. Thanks, Marvin. So our board came together at the beginning of last year, and from our conversations, we did talk about a 5-year strategy, and it's built around 2 key priorities. So the first one was the need to increase our self-sufficiency, and the second one was to improve kaitiakitanga, or the custodianship we have for all of our assets and resources. So if it's okay, I'll talk about each of those.
That'd be good.
Yeah, so the first is around the need to reduce dependence on government funding. We recognise that that's probably not a useful hope. No. So building our own self-sufficiency. And part of it was the language that we tend to use. So when we describe ourselves as a not-for-profit organisation, it can create an assumption that there's a level of dependency and that we're not commercially savvy, for example. So in reality, over those previous few years, we'd been living beyond our means, and this simply had to change. So by changing that language and referring to ourselves as a for-purpose organisation, we give ourselves a bit more scope to be creative and to look for opportunities for what we call social enterprise, which is basically self-sufficiency. It's that idea that we need profit centres that we can then redistribute into the areas of higher need. So our strategy does talk about a number of initiatives that will increase the revenue that we get so that we can protect the services that we have now and also prepare for the future. So we're deliberately exploring new ways of supporting our community, but also generating some profit so that we can reinvest into our mission. One of the areas is, for instance, we've got quite a lot of underutilised space in some of our homes, and we've got some really high-quality services that obviously support those homes, like our kitchens and our laundries. We've also got really good corporate services here in Dunedin in our head office, like IT and HR. So some of our priority areas are about how we explore those spaces and services. They might be able to be used much more widely to support the wider community.
Was there any thinking about cooperation with other service agencies?
Oh, funny you should say that, because that's sort of, definitely part of how a change in how we're wanting to operate. So we talk about a restorative culture. So this is centred around that idea of an antidote to the sense that there's many forces at the moment pulling us apart. And in fact, funding shortages could be one of those, where people start to feel a sense of competition for very few funding opportunities. And we felt that inside our organisation and also across our communities. So we know that to achieve our mission, we actually need to be working together across agencies and with local and national government, and also across our wider community. And that is including things like the businesses in the areas that we operate, our churches and iwi. So we call that collaborative advantage, sort of instead of competitive advantage, and we definitely have some practical goals as part of that 5-year strategy. So one of the early changes that we made, and that was, we finished that early this year, was how we work in our Dunedin office. So if you go in and have a wee look, we used to be physically quite separated in our services. So we've got 4 levels in that building, and we now co-locate and mix and match our services across 3 levels. And we share a single common entranceway and lunchroom, which sounds sort of simple, but actually it's fundamentally changed the way we work together and the way we build closer relationships and support around all of the challenges that we're facing. We're much more integrated, and it's also had the added benefit of freeing up the lower level of our building. So we're hoping that there will be some other services that we can host there.
Do you hope that New Zealand itself becomes more of where people are seeking what they have in common instead of just what we have that's different?
Absolutely, Marvin. I think that whole idea of figuring out how we can, it's almost going back to what we used to do, how we used to gather and come together around philosophy and the reasons that we're all here. And there's a whole lot of things, that idea of the breakdown of social cohesion, that are working against that at the moment. And so I think there's a lot of people that are thinking about it right now and saying, how do we start to actively and consciously work against that?
What is Presbyterian Support Service modeled on? Is it, you see the people you work with as clients, or some other kind of association built on a deeper relationship? I feel this is a question that was called to mind when I read Pope Leo's encyclical, Magnificent Humanity.
Well, I haven't read that, so so you're asking, how do we see the people that we're here to serve? Is that right,
Yes,
Marvin?
that's right.
Well, they're us. Like, fundamentally, we're all part of a community, and I think every human being has struggles, most of which we can't see. But what makes us a community rather than a whole lot of individuals is this idea that we can see ourselves in others and see others in ourselves. And so we come together and we support each other when support is needed, and we celebrate when people are thriving, whether that's us or others. I mean, that's the best part of community. And PSO, I guess, is a bit of a hub for that. We see the extremes of what's really beautiful and good in humanity. Like when I think about all our volunteers and the incredible things they do, and staff that just, I mean, they're not the top paid workers in Otago, and they do extraordinary things every day for their clients and for the people that they've decided to get out of bed and support. Every time we put out a call to the community, you just get blown away by what arrives and who arrives. So that good is there. And of course we see the impact of things that are not going well. And they're our clients, they're our residents, and they're our neighbours, and they're us. That's how I would put it. So we talk about walking alongside people. And that idea is that we're there with them, we're not ahead of them.
Do people feel that they're walked alongside? Does it change people to be helped in this way?
Fundamentally. Actually, do you know, one of my earliest experiences coming to Dunedin, I was finishing my house and I found a second-hand couch, and I went to get this from a woman. And now I want to be careful about how I describe her, but she was a professional working in a very senior role. And she had a couple of children there, and when I mentioned that I was just starting work at PSO, she just looked at me very seriously and said, "Presbyterian support saved my life." And I said, oh, that's great. And then she looked at me and said, "No, Presbyterian support saved my life." And I had the start of an understanding that if you're there in those incredibly pivotal moments in someone's life, you truly have the privilege and opportunity to fundamentally change the course of what's going to happen. And I have since that moment met many people and received letters from many people describing exactly that they felt seen and not judged and supported at a particular time when it really, really mattered for them. And I mean, that's hard to not be delighted by.
Does it change the people that work for Presbyterian support to experience that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you think about human growth and what causes that. I mean, they have hard days. I don't want to glamorize it. I mean, there's people that have to leave because some of our roles are barely above minimum wage, and it's something that as a board we're thinking about constantly. We're an absolute advocate for a living wage, being a living wage employer, and we're working towards that, but it's still structurally really, really challenging. So they don't come to work just to pay the rent. They come kind of despite that sometimes. And but I have also so many staff saying that the best job that they've ever had, that they love what they do, they love where they do it, and they love who they do it with. And I do think, again, it's that call to community. If you get to choose who you're going to work with, we spend a lot of hours of our day there. It's pretty amazing to be around these kind of people. And certainly I love that part of my job too.
I think it's amazing to be able to have a job where you're serving people, because most of us probably don't choose our place of work.
Yeah, I'm told that it's I can't remember who I was listening to. They said yeah, it's probably the majority who survive work for their non-work time, and definitely nobody I work with is like that. we don't just survive, we love what we do.
But that makes a huge difference, I think, in people's lives.
Fundamentally, absolutely. It's just such a strong purpose. It's a reason.
That's also why volunteer work can be useful not only to the people you're helping, but yourself. I
agree. And actually, we have quite a few people that stop work and immediately become a volunteer. It's pretty lovely. And the other way around, we've had volunteers who obviously then become our employees. So,
do you advocate generally for the people you serve, particularly those who are experiencing poverty?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a fundamental part of what we do every day. So we regularly work with families and people suffering, for example, housing insecurity, and we work closely with government agencies and landlords to find suitable tenancies that can accommodate their unique needs. We're in a good position to do that because we have strong relationships with agencies like the MSD, so we can make sure that they have the right information and that they can properly prioritise a client's specific needs and make sure they're fairly considered and prioritised for housing assistance or subsidies. Earlier this year, we put in a submission on the Credit Contracts and Consumer Finance Amendment Bill. So that was about tackling lending practices that pressure people into unaffordable debt. I could give you lots of examples of clients like that we see every day. So like a car purchase, and they get pressured not just for the price of the car to go on finance, but also extra insurance that they probably don't need, or and they just get into that unaffordable debt. And if you buy
something on credit, like a car, you can be spending 20% more.
Absolutely.
On your credit.
Yeah, and so our financial mentors are constantly advocating for clients to reduce or consolidate that sort of bad debt that they've got into something that's a bit more affordable. Yeah.
In a way, by coming here on the radio, isn't that advocacy too?
Yeah, and we do think about that. Obviously, we're pretty busy every day delivering services, but a part of our work is for justice and trying to change the systems that create the situations that we're dealing with every day. So all of our staff know that, and so not just me, but all of there's many leaders that spend time writing articles or working with their local news agents. Sharing the stories of wonderful things that are happening, but also the challenges. So, yeah.
How do you see Presbyterian support? You've talked about this already to some extent, but changing to meet the future, but also what you need to keep similar to what we have now.
That's a good question. I think that the thing that's the same is the humanity. From the word go, we were looking at what is it that is not working in our communities. Who are the people that are being marginalised, the opportunities and that are being lost? So that will always be where we focus. So, for instance, we've got aged care. There are many corporates that have the same sort of services, but we're very conscious that there's a whole group of older people who have very low equity, if anything, who are going to need aged care both now and into the future. So we will always preserve a proportion of our rest home beds for those that cannot afford premium charges. There are many providers that every room has a premium charge, which would be unaffordable for many of our clients. So that mission of looking after the most vulnerable members of our community is the constant. How we deliver it, the change is really just reflecting opportunities and where society's at. So it might be, well, for instance, we had orphanages. That's no longer a need, and so we don't have residential care for children anymore. And we're thinking about social housing at the moment, because we know that secure housing is such a fundamental part of leading a good life and contributing to society. So that's not just for aged care, but we're thinking about intergenerational care, because one of the challenges with the way housing is structured is sort of grouping people too much in cohorts. We know that having young people living amongst older people is really good for all of the generations. So yeah, we're thinking about things like that. Our social services keep changing in response to whatever the greatest need is, but we're also making sure that we're not duplicating. So where possible, if a community is already served, we might have a role in just supporting others that are already making sure that they stay sustainable. And we're certainly not setting up in competition, if that makes sense. So working collaboratively with other social services agencies in each of the spaces that we operate.
Do you have any comment on the volunteer service community that's having problems right now financially?
Look, I don't know well enough what's driving their financial sort of sustainability issues. I saw the two sides in the paper a couple of days ago. It didn't seem like a huge amount of money that was driving this potential crisis, and volunteer labour is such a critical component of how our society works. And it always has been, and it remains vital. So I'm pretty confident the would-be community will to support that particular entity if that's going to keep it thriving. So, I haven't given it enough thought, nor do I understand what the drivers are, Marvin. So, but what I will say is that volunteers are incredible humans, and I'm still amazed at how much time and energy people give across their life. And we work with them every day. We have as many volunteers as we have staff.
It gives meaning to our lives, actually.
That's right. And it actually redefines what work is, doesn't it?
When you were talking about age concern and elderly people, I was thinking about how things have changed in many ways. And one of the things that's changed is when I bought my first house in New Zealand, it was so easy.
Yeah.
We had so much support.
Same.
And now there's going to be a huge cohort, the people that are retiring now, but even more in the future, who won't have a house when they retire, will be paying rent.
Yep.
And I guess that will really affect people's lives, won't it?
Look, there's a number of things coming that we need to be planning for and thinking about. So you're talking about, I've read recently that by 2040, 50% of people over 65 will be renting. Now, I'm just thinking, where are they going? Because the rental stock's not there. And you're right that once you're renting and you're on a fixed income and the cost of living is going up faster than that fixed income, it's a slippery slide into material deprivation for a really big group of people coming through. But I'm also interested when we're thinking about that housing problem in the generation coming through, because there's definite inequality in intergenerational inequity, because young people are seeing it as an impossible dream now, is to even have stable housing.
It seems to me that society, including government, should look forward to more than the next 3 years or 4 years.
Yes.
That if we want a stable society, we have to plan for it. And is planning for society, is that wrong? Is it wrong to try to provide some stability in society and provide for people's needs and plan for their needs?
Look, I don't think anyone would disagree with that, and I think these are exactly the challenges that there's some pretty clever people starting to come together and formulate some really clear messages for not just current government, but for the system of governance. And look, I don't pretend to be an expert in any of this, Marvin, but what I'm excited about is the idea that people start to see housing, for example, as not it's not a vehicle for wealth creation, which is what we've actually created it to be in New Zealand, but as a fundamental infrastructure necessity that should be looked after in a way that is not dependent on a 3-year cycle. So absolutely, the government needs to have, what do they call that, cross-party accords around something as important as housing. And I think some good ideas come up and then get changed again 3 years later, which just creates this massive instability. So yeah, I think there's enough voices that are starting to talk louder and louder about the importance of this. And from a PSO perspective, what we see is the direct impact of housing insecurity on so many different parts of community welfare, well-being.
I was thinking about how housing security or insecurity, I'm not just talking about ownership, I'm talking about if you're a family and you have, particularly if you have children, but just anybody, even single people, like if you have a house that's secure, it might be in a townhouse or it might be an ordinary house. But if it's secure, what does this provide? It provides that maybe if you have children, they'll be able to go to primary school for the whole school and not change every year or even more often because you need to find something cheaper, or you have to deal with where you're going to live and how
exactly. It's absolutely fundamental.
It's not just the house itself that's affected. It affects your entire security of your life.
100%. And so when you're thinking about those children, which we meet and see, they, as you say, with the current rental stock, people sell it really regularly because that's why they bought it in the first place, instead of holding it for 20 years, which gives a tenant security to understand this is where I'm bringing up my children. And the children have secure primary schools, they have secure relationships with those teachers and other adults in their lives, neighbours, who are really important for them to have a sense of confidence in who they are. And we know that children that do not have that stability have way worse learning outcomes, and that drives directly into their prospects for future employment and their own economic security. So it drives health outcomes. It drives. It actually impacts on family security. Like family violence is much higher when we don't have housing insecurity. There is honestly so many areas that it touches on.
I remember people used to know, for instance, if they were in state housing, they were secure. But now it's the market that decides. And if your situation changes, you have to move.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that may be good finance, but it's hardly good social.
No, and often the moves, I mean, we have clients that will be, for instance, offered a house, but it is not within affordable transport distance to either their jobs or to schools that matter to their children. And so, but if they turn that down, then they go to the bottom of the queue. And so housing insecurity issues come back up again. And we have people, say, with pets who are really, really important, not just as a nice to have, but as a fundamental social support. And many rental tenancies in New Zealand just exclude pets altogether. There's lots of structural problems with our housing.
I mean, one of the things I see is that not only is there owning your own home has become unaffordable, but things haven't translated in dealing with that. For instance, if you were in the Netherlands or Germany or most of the Scandinavian countries, you might have to rent, but you would be the rent would be guaranteed what you would pay for.
Exactly. Controlled.
And also your security of tenure would be there. And we decided that the state housing is wrong. We haven't built it, but we haven't changed life for people who have to rent to make up for the fact that we're not going to provide enough housing for people.
Yeah, I love that you're focusing on that, because I agree that it really sits it's a causal thing. So a lot of the energy that we put into supporting clients that are in financial distress start with housing insecurity. And, at the very pointy end of that obviously is homelessness, but there are so many layers of that housing insecurity that go right through society.
I think it's one of the things that's really shocked me about my life. When I grew up, even in America, you didn't have the homelessness that you now have.
No, same. I'd never seen someone that was homeless growing up in Christchurch, and now it's visible.
It's visible because it's increased. And what do we, it makes me ask, what do we want as society? What kind of society? Is making lots of money the most important thing in the world?
You're asking the easy questions, Marvin. Look, obviously, for those of us that are working in social services, we're driven by something different. We're driven by purpose, as you say. But it still is driving our economies. It's still the assumptions that sit behind most of the decisions that seem to be being made. So without fundamentally shifting how we think about what it is to be successful as a country, then I think personally that's what will keep going.
I think our values have changed. I came here in the 70s. And I feel like the values of New Zealand changed, maybe because of the values of the economy changed. I think sometimes, to some extent, the structures you make can change the way you feel and think.
I think there's a lot of unintended consequences, though. Because I still think most people are lovely.
Most people care about other people.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the reasons that I'm quite happy where I'm living is I've got neighbors that are very caring.
Exactly.
And I think most people are. But you need structures that are caring as well.
Yeah, and those are the bits. And I think that's where that sense of frustration and a bit of hopelessness even is happening, because many of the things that seem to be happening feel outside of our control. And I do think it's probably outside of most of the politicians' control at the moment as well.
Well, in the short term, yes, but they could decide ask themselves why we can't change our tax system. They could ask themselves, is where we're going in the right direction?
And I think some are asking exactly that. The question is how we go from where we are now to create the stability of a tax structure, and rather than have it change every 3 years. That's the thing I would love to see, is that we agree as a country that these things are fundamental and we need stability, and therefore we're not going to be meddling with it all the time. We've got to give it time because
the problem is the structure we have has been in place since the 80s.
Yeah,
it hasn't really changed very much since
that's
then.
right.
And it's probably going to be hard to change it. And how do you get people to agree to change it? Because some people will lose out. I mean, depending on what you mean. I hope that if I was very wealthy, I wouldn't mind paying high taxes.
And I think a lot of people say that they would prefer to pay more taxes.
That's true.
But whether they'll vote for it is the question, and that's what I understand is the difference that politicians know, is that even people that will say that they agree and that they know this needs to happen can choose not to vote for it. And so how we can create something that actually is protected from that voting structure
There's also
is what we're looking for.
How the individuals vote, but it's also the structure of lobbyists and some of the economic influence that governments have to deal with.
Yeah. And we've got all of those compounding influences. You're getting me into an area that I'm really interested in and yet have very little expertise. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago and the speaker was amazing. I think it's Max Rashford.
Yes,
that right.
He's good.
I thought he was... Thank you. But truly, if anyone can read his book or hear him... I think he knows this stuff.
I'd love to see him as finance minister.
Well, I just think he was able to really simply, for my brain, explain the structures that have created the system that we have, and to give, I think, everyone in that room a sense of hope that if we've designed it like this, we can actually design something different. But it does take everybody agreeing on that longer term view, because many of the changes will not be seen in 3 years. It's like we've got this we need to create changes that will impact in 20 years.
It's like and
do it now.
A large ship.
Yeah. But they were quite obvious when he articulated the things that need to happen. So.
Yes, well.
It seemed quite simple, Marvin.
Well, I think we have to have faith that we can change things for the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we, that gets us out of bed and it keeps us talking and keeps us pulling people together that believe the same things that we do.
What was your reaction to the Christian Social Service finding that 500,000 New Zealanders live in dire poverty? I guess we've been talking about this in a way for the last...
We have. But look, I did read that report and it is, of course, incredibly sobering. And like you said, it feels different to the New Zealand that I grew up in. The report points out that it's the population of Christchurch. And that's a huge number, but it's also easy to dehumanise a statistic like that. So right now we know 1 in 7 children go without many of the essentials that we take for granted. So things like shoes, their own bed, warm clothes, and fundamentally healthcare when they need it. I read that burden falls much more often on Māori and Pacifica families. And we know that, we meet young people and older people and see that loss of potential that means, that they're unable to contribute to the future of New Zealand. So they're older people who might have had, been part of communities, but they're now living alone and they don't have the basic financial means to keep being part of normal community life. So it's really hard. I mean, we meet these parents every day doing everything they can for kids, or grandparents who are bringing up grandchildren. So they're doing it the second time round. Young people who have deep housing insecurity because they can't safely live at home. So, yeah, I mean, these people that are potentially disconnected from family or community, they're here in Otago, but they're our neighbours everywhere. So for me, when I hear a staggering statistic like that and that quantum of people living in poverty, honestly, I feel really angry. It's not just.
Don't you think we should have a floor where nobody falls below?
Absolutely. Yeah, that living wage idea.
I mean, that's what we had at one time in certain ways. It's not.
Yeah, it's a huge. It's such a fundamental assault on dignity, isn't it?
Don't you feel in a way that the whole society would be better off? Not just the people that would benefit directly, but also that everybody there would be more security. There would be. You could
economically
be proud of your society.
I mean, the research, as I understand it, can demonstrate that it is a false economy. Like if the potential that is lost through the way these families and children and people are living was able to be supported back into society, then even just on an economic level, it would contribute to New Zealand thriving again. So it doesn't make sense.
We're going to face changes no matter what we do, for one thing, because of climate change. And between now and then, though it's not necessarily then, it's now and now in some ways. If everybody feels like they're valued, not just in theory, but they know they'll have a home, they know that their kids can go to school, they know that they won't starve, and the structures are moving toward more equality. Won't we be able to face the changes that we need to adopt to climate change if people have that feeling, that unity?
Look, that sounds like a wonderful place to live and be, not just for, as you say, those people that are currently the least well served, but for all of us. So I mean, I love that idea. I don't know how to get there. And as you say, is it a complete change in how we think about democracy, or something else?
Now, also, we think about the economy.
Yeah.
You know, working in an organization which functions under the statement that every person possesses inherent dignity and worth as bearer of God's image and unconditionally loved, how do you feel about the Move On legislation? And what does it do about the image of homeless people, especially beggars, if people are criminalized?
Sorry, so you're asking about how I feel about homelessness, or the moving on?
The idea that people that are homeless and are considered a nuisance can be makes it easier to move them on, but also they can be arrested or penalized.
Yeah. Well, look, PSO has offered a written and oral submission on this issue very recently. We understand that and acknowledge that communities do want public spaces to feel safe, and that is important and a legitimate concern. But the response proposed through the bill should be evidence-based and accompanied by effective support options for the people that it most fundamentally affects. We just don't believe that the amendment bill will actually achieve safer communities, and we also don't agree that the pointy end of systemic issues like alcohol and drug addiction, mental health issues, and family violence is a law and order issue. So the question that we ask is, how should we respond to people in crisis? Homelessness is usually, as you said before, the visible symptom of a much deeper systemic issue. Housing affordability and shortages mental health that's left to the community to sort, trauma and addiction, and it can just be simply a run of bad luck. So if all we do is move someone on, we haven't actually solved anything. We haven't reduced homelessness. We've simply swept it under the carpet and moved it somewhere else. So the approach that is proposed runs the very real risk of actually making the underlying situation much worse for those people. So it further marginalises people experiencing homelessness, and it puts them into more isolated spaces, and those places often have less access to culturally responsive support services, to food, healthcare, social workers, mental health supports, libraries, which can be a really safe space, and also informal community networks that they've formed. So we see that proposed change as increasing social isolation and vulnerability. The other point I would make is that the penalties feel very disproportionate, and they won't actually work. So if people don't have the ability to pay them, it just increases what is already severe financial hardship. So the bill effectively puts more pressure on people that are suffering from poverty, housing shortages, and unmet health, income, disability or social support and connection needs.
What are your hopes for the future?
Okay, so we've talked about some of them.
Yes, I know.
But I guess my hope is that we stop accepting poverty, loneliness and inequality as inevitable. I think we've reached a point in New Zealand where many people feel that something isn't quite working, like as we talked about, and too many families are being excluded from the basics of a dignified life. So many people are working incredibly hard and still struggling to afford a warm home, healthy food, decent clothes, and the basics that everybody should be able to rely on. And I do want to make the point, it's not because people aren't trying hard enough. I think it's that some of the systems we've built simply aren't delivering what communities need. I am hopeful that there's enough momentum and concern across New Zealand that we will come together to find new solutions. We talked about that idea of, bringing people together around these topics.
It seems to me that one of the things I see is that some of the hardest working people have real struggle. I mean, cleaners don't get paid a lot.
No.
But think of how essential cleaning is in place, especially in institutions. Like hospitals or even restaurants.
I totally agree, and that's the big change that we are seeing is who we're supporting, and it is often working families. So it's people who are in employment. They will have one or two people in work, but the nature of a job has changed. It's that it might be less secure, it might be lower paid, but it isn't enough anymore.
Well, thank you very much for coming and talking to us. I really appreciate the effort you've been put into this interview.
Oh, thank you, Marvin. Oh, look, it's wonderful to have a chat about these things. I kind of wish we had a few more solutions, but I really do have hope that there's people coming together, and certainly we want to be part of the conversations moving forward, not just about how do we keep addressing the impacts of poverty, but how do we put in place those systems that will mean that so much fewer people are actually suffering from it in the first place.
Well, thank you, Robbie, for coming on board and talking about Presbyterian support.
Yeah. Look, if I'll give a wee plug. If anybody would like to support the work that we do, please go onto our website. We have so many wonderful supporters, and we love to stay in touch with those that would like to get involved.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.